The extraction was late. The comms were dirty. Everyone stared at the same grid. Same telemetry. Same blank feed. No one moved. No one questioned the silence. They blamed weather. They blamed signal drift. They waited for a new order that didn't come. Specialist Elena Ward didn't speak. She tapped once on her side console, adjusted the gain, shifted the spectrum by 1 digit. A shape blinked back onto the map. She didn't raise her voice. She just marked the location and said, "They're still alive." No one remembered assigning her that channel, but it was the only one that worked. The wind over the ice plain came in long, shallow gusts, brushing loose snow across the treads of the tracked utility vehicle as it climbed the last incline toward forward operating base Bellwether. Staff Sergeant Rowan Trinh kept both gloved hands steady on the control yoke, the dashboard flickering amber in the corner of her vision. Engine temperature stable. Power relay green. Comms lope dead. Through the slanted windshield, the base appeared as little more than a jagged silhouette against the flat horizon. 2 antennae, a windswept main module, and the stub of a comms mast leaning slightly west from frost shift. No smoke from the generator stacks, no movement on the roof walk, no one at the gate. She didn't blink. Her fingers tapped the side of the console twice, not out of nerves, but calibration. She parked the rover just inside the outer barrier, its hinge gate hanging open and frozen, crooked Vilius Enedaus. The hydraulic piston had locked sometime during the storm. She marked the anomaly mentally, then stepped down into the snow, her boots crunching through a hardened layer that had crusted over during the cold snap. The air bit through her outer hood in a dry way, Arctic cold that didn't sting so much as it flattened every breath. Her parka's left sleeve bore the brushed-on marks of a week's field grime. Her tools still hung on the inner belt. Undisturbed. She had made the round-trip repair alone, 70 kilometers out and back, and never powered down. Her steps toward the compound were deliberate. No other vehicle tracks in the snow. No boot prints. No drag lines. Even the snow fencing on the southern perimeter lay undisturbed. Wire panels coated evenly in rime. At the main door, she paused. The keypad was unlocked. Power flickered through the touch panel, then reset. She didn't touch it yet. She looked up. No roof lights. One of the external security cameras twitched, then stopped. Inside, the vestibule lighting cycled once before, stabilizing. The floor was dry. The bench along the wall held a single glove. Palm up. No coats hung. She keyed into the second door manually. Bypassing the sensor, her ID was still valid. The lock opened without sound. That was the first thing that felt wrong. These doors always hissed. The interior of the main corridor held an odd kind of stillness. Not dead powered. Boot quiet. Lights on half cycle. Wall consoles blinking standby. Her boots struck the floor in soft, uniform impact. The air inside was warmer, but not by much. She passed the mess hall, empty trays, one coffee cup on the table, tilted. The base's quiet was not just absence. It was staged, interrupted. Then she heard it. A soft, repeating pulse. Low and mechanical, filtering through the inner wall speaker. It was the emergency beacon, underrated for full alert, overpowered for diagnostics. A loop. She followed it 3 doors deeper, down the operations hallway, until she reached the comms desk. The red light blinked slowly above the terminal, not flashing, not off. A half-second beat. Then again. She leaned in just far enough to hear the message cut through static, "Do not trust" command. The message repeated once, then faded into mechanical buzz. Rowan didn't move. Not at first. The light blinked again, casting a red flicker across her glove. She looked down the hall behind her, then back to the console. The base remained silent, still powered. Still empty. She stood there, alone at the threshold. One breath, fogging faintly in the cold light as the beacon looped again. The mess hall still smelled faintly of powdered broth and plastic trays. Rowan stepped through slowly, her boots silent on the reinforced vinyl flooring. The overhead lights were running dim emergency mode, but not off. One fixture flickered every 7 seconds, its ballast humming just before each pulse. The far tables were still arranged in clean rows, untouched. On the counter, an open packet of dehydrated noodles sat beside a cup of reconstituted milk, untouched, ringed with a dried meniscus. She didn't touch anything, just scanned. One chair was pushed back, unevenly, not violently, just wrong. She moved next into the short hallway, leading to the operations center. Her hand brushed the radio clip to her vest. No signal. No return. The silence pressed harder in this section, where comms chatter usually leaked through even when the door was sealed. The first door on the left status reports was ajar. Inside, the wall screen was frozen on an old weather feed. No audio. Timestamp off by 3 hours. The base clock showed one time, the systems another. It wasn't just delay. It had been manually overridden and not resynced. That required clearance, or someone in a hurry. She stepped into the main ops room and let the silence settle. This was where the coordination board hung a laminated grid of assignments. Names. Shifts. It was blank. The pens still clung to their Velcro holsters on the side panel. All capped, all upright. Her gloved hand brushed one as she moved toward the radar console. The standby light was solid green. No active tracking. The main monitor had been shut down cleanly. No error code. No crash. Then she noticed the data cable had been unplugged, not cut, not frayed, just disconnected and coiled neatly to one side of the terminal. The power cord, too, lay beside it, still intact, still warm. She crouched down to check the input feed and paused. Taped to the underside of the panel was a torn square of notepad paper. The tape was crude, hastily applied. In marker, the words were written in slanted block script. If you hear the override ping, cut power, it's not us. Rowan exhaled slowly. Her breath clouded faintly in the cold air, drifting from the half-functional vent. She stood without comment, her motion precise. One hand adjusted the radio again. Still dead. She didn't look behind her. Barracks were next. She entered the east wing alone. Each bunk was made with military precision blankets tucked, pillows squared. But the footlockers told a different story. One had been forced open. Another hung open at the hinges, with clothing still folded neatly inside. No sign of struggle. No sign of packing. The personal items, photos, field journals, even a half-used deck of cards remained untouched. It was as if everyone had left without taking anything. And without warning. That wasn't how military rotations worked. There was always a staging order. This wasn't one. She moved quietly between the beds, stopping once to glance at a pair of boots still laced beside one cot. They were damp near the sole, not soaked, just faintly soft. Used recently, within the last day. She made no sound as she moved on. Outside, the wind had picked up again. In the equipment yard, the snow had gathered in uneven mounds against the tool sheds. She stepped past the main fuel tank half full, status light blinking amber, and approached the maintenance cart. The ignition key was still in place, battery indicator low. The toolkit had been opened, not raided, just opened, with a few sockets missing, and the small lamp left powered on inside its slot. The emergency beacon was louder now, as if the wind had shifted just enough to carry its echo against the wall of the motor pool. That loop again, a short hiss of static, followed by the garbled voice. Do not trust command, then a sharp click, then silence. She turned back toward the main structure, her pace steady. There was no fear in her face, no confusion. But as she reached the rear utility corridor, she slowed slightly. Her left hand rose, fingers grazing the seal of her vest, brushing over the spare battery tucked against her inner pocket. Back inside, the lights in the hallway had begun to pulse, not a power surge, but a cycle misfire. Diagnostics mode. Possibly. She didn't correct it, didn't log it. She passed through toward the comm station again, the message still echoing faintly. The console light blinked red again. The beacon loop had reset back. Rowan stepped forward and reached under the console with one hand, brushing her fingers once more against the taped message. She stood completely still. Her shoulders didn't rise. Her gaze didn't shift. But she listened carefully now. The silence too complete. The power hum slightly wrong. She remained there, alone, framed by flickering red. The loop beginning again. The diagnostics terminal in the lower comms bay came online with a sluggish hum. Staff Sergeant Rowan Trinh pulled the override plate from her belt and inserted it into the secondary access slot beneath the main relay housing. It clicked into place without resistance. Her other hand typed a sequence across the half-lit keyboard, fingers moving in practiced rhythm despite the gloves. The display took 3 seconds longer than usual to stabilize, the loading bar sticking twice before catching up. That hesitation meant corrupted cache or an interrupted shutdown. Neither made sense if the base had been pre-cleared. The screen flickered once, then again. Finally, the terminal spat out a partial command log. Lines of time-stamped entries listed without full descriptions. Most were system pings. Several lines were redacted. One stood out, an urgent packet from higher headquarters marked with a Tier 1 flag. The header data was incomplete. Missing routing node details. No authentication hash. Rowan narrowed her eyes, leaned in, and tapped the header line to expand. The command ID lit up in pale green, blinking once. It didn't match any Tier 1 structure she had seen. Her memory pulled at a half-buried training session from years back, protocol flag mismatches, things that had been phased out after Joint Command restructure. This one was 2 digits too short. She checked again. Still there. Still active. The packet had been received, not just logged. That meant it was allowed through firewall parameters. Someone or something had let it in. Above her, the ceiling-mounted surveillance dome made a soft mechanical shift. The tiny internal motor reoriented its field of view. She hadn't touched the console's sensor controls. She glanced up without tilting her head. Just her eyes. The dome paused. Lens centered toward her for 1 second longer than necessary. Then it returned to idle. The red LED blinked softly. It wasn't supposed to blink in diagnostic mode. Rowan didn't move right away. She adjusted the brightness on the monitor and began backing the system through local logs. A few returns came through equipment assignments, logistics requests, static comm traffic. One line stood out. A flagged access of an external camera archive, labeled with an ID not listed in the equipment manifest. It came from the equipment shed near the south perimeter. She left the console as it was and stepped back into the corridor. The red light from the beacon still pulsing at regular intervals down the hall. Outside, the wind had faded. Snowfall was fine and steady now. Drifting in ribbons across the open concrete between buildings, she crossed the yard toward the shed, boot treads marking clean impressions across the drift. The door opened with effort, frost at the hinges. She slipped inside and let her eyes adjust. One overhead light blinked erratically. The gear was still in place. Emergency sled kits, sealed containers, snowshoes. A wall locker, labeled B4, that hung slightly open. She crouched, scanning beneath the rack. A snow boot sat angled against the back wall. Its cuff collapsed inward. She pulled it forward carefully. Inside, something rattled. She turned it upside down. A black flash drive slid out onto her gloved palm. Back in the comms bay, she inserted the drive into an isolated input port, one not connected to the active net. The system took longer than expected to recognize the drive. When it did, a single video file appeared, time-stamped from 5 days prior. The feed was grainy, cam quality. The angle shook as the technician adjusted it with trembling fingers. He was seated against a wall panel somewhere darker than this bay. Fluorescent light bled in from one side. His voice was hushed, barely audible over the faint hum of background fans. I know it's broadcasting. I tagged the echo. The delay, it's too perfect. The loop's not a failsafe, it's a lure. You hear it and respond. It keys off that. It mimics return patterns. Audio profiles. It's learning. He glanced off screen, as if listening. The clip stuttered once. The man leaned back against the wall, eyes wide. It's not spoofing traffic. It's replicating recognition. If you respond to it, it doesn't just track. It replicates something in the stack below where it should be. It's recursive. Rowan sat still. Her eyes locked to the screen. The man inhaled sharply, then looked directly into the lens. If this gets found, if anyone sees this, don't answer it. Don't respond to your own name if it calls you back. It's not you. The screen went black. She removed the drive, locked it in a static pouch, and set it beside her on the bench. The main console screen flickered again. The red LED above the surveillance dome blinked twice. Rowan tapped into the passive scan spectrum. No alerts. No warnings. But a faint ping echoed through the diagnostics window, an encrypted frequency, logging a handshake every 4 minutes. Her equipment wasn't broadcasting. She double-checked. It was inbound only. The pattern came again. Soft but rhythmic. Not random. Not environmental. A synthetic tone, buried in the channel used for maintenance sync. Masked to appear dormant. She adjusted the waveform, isolating the pattern. Her hand hovered near the mute switch but didn't press it. Instead, she ran a modulation overlay, something she hadn't done since deployment in Greenland. The waveform shifted into clarity. Her own voice, faint and halting, returned through the speaker. Rowan Trinh. Copy traffic relay command received. Please confirm. She didn't speak. She didn't move. The line pulsed once more. Exactly 4 minutes later, the diagnostics loop triggered again at exactly 0400. Staff Sergeant Rowan Trinh stood beside the inactive radar stack, watching the return signal build strength across the maintenance sync band. The ping sequence was getting faster. The initial 4-minute delay had shaved 5 seconds. Since her last note, she scribbled it on the edge of her field log with a ballpoint pen, no stylus. No tablet. No network. Just ink. The page was creased now, moisture curling the edges where her gloves had pressed down. She pulled her scarf tighter around her collar and glanced up at the ceiling-mounted speaker in the hallway. The first time she heard it, she'd stopped moving. Not from shock, but from calibration. The voice that came through the old PA was her own. Distorted at first, like it had been filtered through ice and static from, but unmistakably hers. Field team return. Stand by. Rowan Trinh. Please confirm position. There had been no announcement chime, no click of relay, no transmission handoff. Just her voice, clear and slightly out of sync. Her voice, but not one she remembered recording. She had waited for it to repeat. It did. The same cadence, same inflection. The only thing that shifted was the pitch flattened by just under half a tone, the kind of shift you'd find in machine learning mimicry before it locked in a stable identity. The hallway lights didn't flicker. There was no drama. Just the quiet overhead call. followed by silence. She moved to the comms station and unlocked the equipment locker where the thermal scope was kept. The scope wasn't standard issue. She had brought it from her previous post. Cleared by her CO only because it wasn't connected to the data net. She pulled it from the padded case and ran the internal test cycle. Battery 91%. Optics clean. Last calibration 4 days ago. She didn't speak as she stepped to the side window. The exterior yard lay quiet in the pale blue light of early morning. Snow drifted in fine curtains. Beyond the fuel shed, nothing moved. She scanned sweeping the thermal overlay from north to east. Then down along the south-facing corridor wall, the display showed expected gradations: warm exhaust beneath the snow rover's engine bay, cooling footprints near the entry where she'd stood earlier. Then she shifted left and paused. Near the perimeter fence, beside the old relay terminal, was a single stationary shape. It registered on the thermal band, but faintly, 32 degrees Celsius, at most, well below human body temperature. No breath vapor. No core heat signature. No movement. No melt radius in the snow. She blinked once. The reading remained. A vertical form. Too still. Too thin. The contrast ratio pulsed slightly. Not from motion, but from lag. She adjusted the scope's gain. The shape didn't vanish. It just stopped radiating altogether. As if it knew it was being looked at. Rowan backed away from the window and let the scope hang from its strap. Her hand rested on her thigh. Steady. No breath spike. She removed her field log from her vest pocket and opened to the last page. Below the notes about signal drift, she began a fresh entry. Visual confirmation. Object near perimeter fence. Non-human signature. Observed thermal bleed inconsistent with environmental diffusion. No footpath. No movement. She stopped. Then underlined the last word. She flipped back to the earlier pages. Signal behavior had shifted 12 times in 24 hours. Each packet was cleaner than the last. Compression loss had decreased. Echo delay narrowed. By hour 19, the signal no longer looped. As a recording, it responded to passive alignment, adjusting its playback range to match her own voice modulation. Not just mimicry. It was tailoring itself. She leaned against the console and tapped the metal housing twice. No pattern. No rhythm. Just tactile focus. The PA system clicked again. Her voice returned. Slightly different this time. Rowan Trinh. Base secure. Visual link confirmed. Please return to central control. The syntax was perfect, but the tone was wrong. Tueven. No local accent drift. None of the micro-pitch rises she hadn't realized were her own until she heard them missing. She crossed the room and muted the PA speaker. Then she opened the emergency logbook, the one used only when base systems were down or contaminated. In the upper left corner, she wrote the words, "Do not acknowledge return calls." She slid the book into a sealed pouch and attached it to the external door. If anyone else returned, it would be the first thing they saw, but she didn't expect anyone to come. Downstairs, she activated the offline recording deck and pulled the microphone from its holster. She didn't speak into it. She just let the deck roll. 2 minutes of silence. Then 3. When the signal pinged again, she didn't log it. She listened to its shape. How the tone curved around the carrier wave. How it tried to fill in the gaps of what it thought she needed to hear. She didn't write it down this time. Instead, she started to memorize it. She stood beside the darkened console, scarf pulled close, thermal viewer still strapped to her shoulder, and began repeating the timing under her breath. Without volume. Not to track it. To prepare. She had the sense that soon, it wouldn't just be echoing her voice. It would try to echo her timing, her choices, her logic. And when it did, She needed to be ready. The whine of treads came low and distant, filtered through snow and steel. Staff Sergeant Rowan Trinh stood just inside the shadow of the equipment bay, partially concealed behind a stacked storage crate. The rover appeared on the horizon with the same profile as hers, same hull, same track angle. Even the auxiliary shovel strapped crooked to the left fender. She hadn't powered it. No one else had been scheduled for field operations this week. She didn't move. She watched. The vehicle coasted into the perimeter with an exactness that was almost rehearsed. It slid to a stop at the same angle she had used. The lights didn't power down. The engine cut without a hiss. Seconds later, the main base floodlights came online brighter than necessary, flooding the yard with colorless light. She heard the mechanical locks on the north entrance disengage. Inside the compound, every status LED shifted from red to green in sequence. The emergency beacon stopped. There was no tone. No fade. It ceased instantly, like someone had flipped a master switch. The silence that followed was not relief. It felt compressed, dense, like the pause between questions. She crouched and steadied her breathing. The door on the rover opened. A figure stepped out in full outer gear parka. Gloves. Face shield up. Regulation boots. Shoulder insignia too distant to confirm. From behind, the silhouette passed for any one of her team. But the gait was wrong. Not wrong in a broken sense, wrong in its exactness. Each step was too measured. The upper body stayed level. The swing of arms, symmetric to the point of rigidity. It crossed the open yard, passing by the floodlight tower without flinching at the glare. It paused once near the side of the shed and looked up toward the camera housing on the corner of the building. It held that gaze for 4 seconds. Not long enough to seem odd if you weren't paying attention, but Rowan was. She shifted behind the crate and slipped her thermal scope from its case. The sensor warmed quickly. She raised it and scanned across the perimeter until she found the figure again. Now approaching the main entry door, there was no heat signature. Or rather, there was just not the kind that made sense. The parka radiated residual warmth, the same as any gear worn outdoors, but the figure itself, beneath the material, was flat. No chest gradient, no breath, no facial warmth near the eyes or nose. It wasn't cold in the way an exposed body might be. It was cold in the way a space behind insulation gets buffered. Unreadable. The scanner confirmed a temperature of 29 degrees Celsius across the outerwear. No internal spike. No pulse indicators. She lowered the scope, tucked it back into the lining of her jacket, and shifted her weight against the crate. Her fingers håller near his sidearm. She didn't draw. Not yet. The figure passed through the door into the base. No key swipe. No hesitation. The motion sensor engaged without protest. Inside, lights flicked on down the corridor, in sequence. The hallway PA crackled once. Then silence. Rowan moved along the outer wall toward the opposite entrance, taking the longer route to the secondary window panel facing into the operations wing. She crouched beneath it, then eased up slowly, careful not to trigger the light sensor overhead. Through the gap, she could see the back of the figure, now standing near the central console. It tilted its head slightly, as if listening. The angle was too shallow to see a face. One hand reached toward the panel, not touching it, just hovering. Then it dropped, and the figure turned toward the ceiling camera. The posture was too calm, not relaxed, constructed. Everything about it moved in ways that suggested understanding, but no feeling. It didn't check corners. It didn't glance at exits. It didn't behave like someone returning home. Rowan's hand stayed just above her holster, 2 fingers resting lightly on the edge of the grip. She didn't blink. She watched as the figure walked once around the console, paused again beneath the speaker, and then, slowly, looked up. She could see just enough of the face now, too smooth, No muscle shift. No refocus. The eyes didn't move the way they should, they just landed and held. She knew that stare, not from training, from equipment testing. That was how prototype drones held visual lock before mimicking motion. But this wasn't a drone. It was wearing her team's uniform, her team's gear, her team's boots. The figure stood for another few seconds, unmoving, and then continued deeper into the compound. Rowan stayed crouched by the window, the cold glass fogging slightly near her cheek. Her hand never rose from her sidearm, but she didn't draw because she wasn't sure if shooting it would mean anything at all. Rowan dropped into the service corridor behind the barracks and didn't close the hatch. The overhead sensors were still dark in this section, but she didn't trust the silence. Her boots were wrapped in thermal mesh strips, triple layered over the soles to mute her tread. Each step landed carefully, heel to ball, on narrow grating beneath flickering fluorescent strips. The air smelled of coolant and rust. Her breath came shallow. Time to match the buzz of the wall relays. Noise, masked noise. The outer relay tower stood 300 meters from the base shell, beyond the southern fence line, accessible through the old maintenance crawl. She'd used it once last winter during a blizzard when the overhead path was buried. No one else had logged access since. As she reached the bend near the old junction closet, the first floodlight activated above ground. The metal above her thudded as it swung open. Motorized. Pivoting slowly until its beam passed across the corridor hatch she'd left open. Her fingers went to the latch controls on her forearm. She didn't engage them. Instead, she backed to the wall and waited. A beat passed. Then another. The panel dimmed again. A soft vibration carried through the floor from the deck, plating something heavy moving slowly. Not footsteps, not tracked, just motion. She resumed walking, 1 foot at a time, hugging the darker seams between panels. Overhead, the PA speakers crackled to life. Base perimeter secure. Confirming safe zone status. Rowan Trinh. Please respond. The voice was her own, clear now, uncompressed. The phrasing had improved. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder and ducked into the next bypass tunnel, lowering her height to avoid brushing the sensors along the ducting. Her knee grazed a bolt, drawing a faint clang. She froze. One breath, then silence. The next section was narrow, just wide enough to slide through sideways. She moved like liquid, shoulders angled, bag held tight. The wind above shifted direction. She felt it through the grates, cold pressure drawing inward. The mimic was adjusting systems, reallocating airflow to trace her path. Stand down. Sergeant. Relay confirms your signal. No threat detected. Another speaker. Closer. Louder. The cadence perfect. The pauses nearly matched her own. She reached the sub-panel access for the southern exterior and pulled the emergency release. The panel cracked open and let in a blast of wind. The relay tower was 50 meters out, half obscured in white. The snow had thinned but not stopped. The lights along the perimeter blinked awake in pairs. She sprinted low, legs tight, arms locked close. Not reckless, measured. She knew the blind spots, past the antenna housing, behind the overturned generator crate, beneath the comms dish anchor, where the ground formed a natural dip. Another light powered on directly above her. She didn't stop. At the tower base, she dropped to one knee and opened the manual junction box. The interior was clean, no ice intrusion. The relay cable was thick, rubber-sleeved, coiled through a power junction where old fiber met analog hardware. She reached for the latch. The speaker on the tower activated. You were right. But now everyone's listening. No distortion. No static. Her voice. Exactly as it sounded in debriefings. The cadence matched how she spoke after a long, slower. Deliberate. Not her live voice. Her recorded fatigue. She didn't hesitate. Her hand found the cable bracket. She pulled it hard. Twisting left. Then wrenching downward. The bracket gave with a sharp clunk. The relay feed blinked once. Twice. Then blacked out. Floodlights died. Speakers cut. Interior sensors fell still. The wind was the only thing that remained. She stood slowly. Breath steady now. Eyes fixed on the base. No lights. No signals. No voice. Just cold. The base was silent. No lights glowed from the windows. No machines hummed beneath the floor. The wind moved across the compound in long and brisk, steady sheets, brushing snow up against the walls in slow drifts that curled at the edges like ash from a burn. Staff Sergeant Rowan Trinh moved up the access ladder without haste, one hand steady on the ice-rung rail. Her rifle was slung low across her back. The field log, now full, was tucked beneath one arm, sealed shut with a plastic clip. The rooftop was crusted over but intact. The high-frequency emergency unit sat bolted to the far corner, dusted with snow, but still solid beneath the casing. She brushed off the surface, flipped the access panel, and adjusted the frequency wheel by feel. The relay blinked once as it received power from the manual crank. No preamble. No status check. She pressed the switch and leaned forward. Forward operating base bellwether. Compromised. Unknown signal origin. Base offline. No survivors confirmed. Do not re-enter. She released the key and let the wind carry the message into the white. The sky had begun to brighten to a hard silver, the kind that came just before full morning. No color. No cloud texture. Just a rising contrast between the land and everything above it. She walked to the edge of the roof, set the logbook beside her rifle, and sat. Her breath fogged once, then faded. She watched the ridgeline, far beyond the fence, beyond the relay tower, beyond where anything should have reached. The HF receiver ticked softly. Then the return came, cracked, warped, but familiar. Rowan Trinh, confirm. She didn't move. The wind pulled at her collar. Her eyes stayed fixed on the distant snow. Her hands stayed still. The receiver blinked again. She said nothing. In the end, Rowan Trinh didn't need recognition to do what was necessary. She didn't shout, didn't demand answers, and didn't wait for orders that would never come. Alone in the cold, surrounded by silence and systems built to ignore her, she made the choice that mattered. She listened when others dismissed. She moved when others froze. And in a world that rewards noise, she proved that quiet strength can still carry weight. Her story is not about victory. It's about clarity, about what happens when someone sees through the noise and acts, even when no one's watching. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts below. Tell us what part spoke to you. Or follow for more stories like this about those who stand their ground when everything else falls silent.